Good afternoon. Greetings from the Nanovic Institute for European Studies here at the University of Notre Dame. My name is Clemens Sedmak, and I serve as director of the Nanovic Institute, which has been established to build bridges between our university and Europe. Our newly inaugurated university president, Father Bob Dowd, has mentioned bridge building as a fundamental aspect of his vision for the University of Notre Dame. Bridge building is a key calling of the Nanovic Institute for European Studies. The connection to Ukraine is of particular importance to us. We have a special bridge built between Notre Dame and Ukraine, particularly the Ukrainian Catholic University, with its president, Archbishop Boris Gutsiak, and its rector, Taras Stopko. Vladimir Tochinovsky, Dean of Social Sciences at the Ukrainian Catholic University, is with us as a visiting fellow this fall semester. We want to build bridges through friendships, encounters, and exchanges, but also through the flow of knowledge, insights, and information. Today's virtual flash panel is an opportunity to better understand the current situation in and development of Ukraine. Welcome to our flash panel, Religious Freedom in Ukraine. We are approaching 1,000 days of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. On February 24, 2022, Ukraine, a sovereign country, was attacked in an unprovoked war, violating the basic standards of international law. This aggression has led to countless atrocities. While we are engaging in these, however important, academic reflections and analysis, Ukrainian soldiers are risking their lives at the front lines, and civilians are in constant danger of losing everything to shelling. Just today, the BBC featured a story about the front line near Pokrovsk, a small mining city about 37 miles to the northwest of the regional capital Donetsk. The city, so we read, feels like a ghost town. Injured soldiers are treated, drones keep attacking, the Ukrainian army defends the country, there are constant threats and toxic stress. We don't want to forget that the aggression is as unprovoked as real. Ukraine is fighting for its freedom and for the values of dignity and democracy we are committed to. Ukraine finds itself in an extraordinary and very difficult situation, which can call for extraordinary means. One paradox in democracy research is the difficult question of how to protect democracies with non-democratic means. Religious freedom is clearly a pillar of democracy and democratic values. On August 20th, the Ukrainian government established a law banning the activities of religious groups tied to the Russian Orthodox Church. This is a restriction of religious freedom. Pope Francis found critical words about the law. I fear, he said, for the freedom of those who pray, because those who truly pray always pray for all. We are here to learn, listen, and understand. What is the background and basis for this legislation? What does it mean in everyday life? What is the current situation and the future of religious freedom in Ukraine? Our distinguished panel will explore these questions. We have three experts on this panel. Our fourth panelist, Professor Diane Desierto, is unwell and cannot join us, but she has sent me her thoughts, which I will bring to your attention. That is why I will also introduce Diane in absentia, wishing her all the best. So let me please briefly introduce our panelists in the order of their inputs. Anatoly Babinsky joins us from Lviv, Ukraine, where he serves as faculty lecturer at the Ukrainian Catholic University. He has also been here on campus in Notre Dame as a very appreciated postdoctoral research associate in the theology department. Anatoly is a church historian with deep knowledge of the history of his country, Ukraine. Welcome, Anatoly. Thank you so much for joining us from Lviv. Regina Elsner is professor and chair for Eastern Churches, Ecumenical Studies, and Peace Research at the University of Münster, Germany. In her work, she has focused on the historical and theological aspects of the Russian Orthodox Church's confrontation with modernity and knows Russia and Ukraine well, having worked in this part of Europe for years. Welcome, Regina. Thank you for joining us from Münster, Germany. Jose Casanova is a sociologist of religion, Professor Emeritus and Senior Fellow at the Barclay Center for Religion, Peace and World Affairs at Georgetown University. Jose's book, Public Religions in the Modern World, has become a modern classic. He has also published in Ukrainian, knows the country so very well. Welcome, Jose. Thank you for joining us. Diane Desierto in absentia is Professor of Law and Global Affairs, Faculty Director of the LLM in International Human Rights Law, and Global Director of the Global Human Rights Clinic in Notre Dame's Law School. She is, I'm also proud to say, not only an international human rights expert, but also a faculty fellow of the Nanovic Institute for European Studies. As we said, all good wishes for your health, Diane, and thank you for sending me some of your points. Welcome all. This is the choreography of our panel. Each panelist will offer his or her insights for 5 to 8 minutes, and then we will have some time for questions and comments. I will probably ask the panelists to respond to each other first, and then we'll open the floor to the audience. Please send us your questions by using the button at the bottom of your screens. We will end on time after 1 hour, since we want to respect people's busy schedules. So again, welcome all, and please, Anatoly, if I could give the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Clement. Thank you for having me, for inviting me. So I will present background of this topic and a bit of history, church history in Ukraine in recent decades. So the final years of Soviet rule witnessed an explosion of religious diversity in Ukraine. Suppressed religious groups re-emerged, challenging the religious framework established by the communist regime. As a result, religious freedom wasn't something the newly independent Ukrainian authorities needed to implement. It was already a reality they had to navigate. Consequently, Ukraine now has some of the most liberal legislation regarding the religious organizations in entire post-Soviet space. It is important to emphasize that in Ukraine, religious organizations were the initiators and primary defenders of religious freedom. Even when some religious leaders or politicians sympathized with the Russian or Belarusian models, where one religious group holds a semi-state status, representatives of other religious communities in Ukraine made it clear they would not agree. Moreover, religious organizations that had endured persecution during the Soviet regime played a crucial role in challenging the state's exclusive role over the society. Alongside the dissident movement, they undermined the authoritarian regime, reducing the government's dominance and laying the foundations for civil society in Ukraine. The data reveals a dramatic surge in religious diversity and liberty in Ukraine following independence. In the late 1980s, under Soviet control, there were just over 5,000 registered religious communities, with the Russian Orthodox Church dominating, about 80%. The second largest group was the Evangelical Baptist Union, followed by few Roman Catholic and Jewish communities. By the time Ukraine declared independence, there were already more than 12,000 registered communities in Ukraine. This growth continued, and by 2003, over 27,000 religious organizations have been established. By 2014, on the eve of the Russian invasion, the number had skyrocketed over 35,000 registered communities representing more than 55 different denominations. This demonstrates that on the eve of the invasion, Ukrainians enjoyed significant freedom to establish and practice their faith. I will not delve into the details of what happened in the regions under the Russian occupation after 2014. The numbers speak for themselves. According to the State Service of Ukraine for Ethnic Policy and Freedom of Conscience, approximately 2,220 religious organizations representing 43 religious denominations existed on the Crimea Peninsula before the annexation. By 2020, only 907 religious organizations representing just 20 denominations remained. Thus, the number of religious communities in Crimea has more than halved since the occupation. A similar trend occurred in the occupied territories of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, where the number of religious organizations decreased by more than half. while the communities of the Moscow Patriarchate remained largely unchanged. Since the full-scale invasion in 2022, heated discussions have emerged in Ukraine regarding the role of the Moscow Patriarchate in constructing the ideological basis for the invasion. The Patriarch of Moscow firstly supported Russia's invasion of Ukraine, even calling it a holy war. None of the bishops of the Russian Orthodox Church, many of whom reside in a free world, condemned the Patriarch's actions. The hierarchs of the Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine were only able to express disagreement with the position of their Patriarch. I believe there is no need to explain the reasons behind the negative attitude toward the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukrainian society and government. The law adopted in August bans the activities of Russian Church within Ukraine's territory. It's important to emphasize that it is specifically the Russian Church that has been banned. A similar situation is unfolding with the Moscow Patriarchate in Estonia and Latvia, where authorities are working to secure their religious space from Russian propaganda and to push their Orthodox churches to declare independence from Moscow. The situation of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church remains a delicate issue. According to the charter granted by Patriarch Alexei II, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is independent and self-governing in its administration, though still under the jurisdiction of the Moscow Patriarchate. For decades, since Ukraine declared independence, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church has not denied its affiliation with the Russian Orthodox Church. On the contrary, it has consistently emphasized that this connection legitimizes its position within the world orthodoxy. After the start of the full-scale invasion, they claimed that the same charter or gramota now meant their complete independence from Moscow. It remains unclear how the newly adopted law will impact the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. The Church itself asserts that the law does not apply to them, and they do not consider themselves a part of the Russian Orthodox Church. I can assume that some of its religious communities and associations may face deregistration, not a ban on their activities, but deregistration. If it is proven in court that they continue to be a part of Russian Church, which is banned in Ukraine. Importantly, the law doesn't restrict believers' rights to pray or engage in other religious practices. In Ukraine, churches are not legal entities, only religious communities are, and these communities can continue to exist and operate even without state registration. We all agree that the state has no right to interfere in purely religious matters, such as who can or cannot receive Holy Communion, or whether a church should be independent of Autocephalous or subordinate to a religious center outside its borders. These are canonical issues beyond the state's competence. However, the nature of Russian aggression against Ukraine is hybrid, with nearly every sphere being weaponized, including the religious one. Before the onset of open invasion, the narratives propagated by the Russian Church included notions that denied Ukraine's existence and undermined its people's identity, as well as the validity of other religious traditions within the Ukraine territory. These messages were disseminated through various channels, including those operating within Ukraine itself. Such exploitation of religion not only threatens the security of states, but also jeopardizes the very idea of religious freedom. The Ukrainian government finds itself on a shaky ground or uncertain path, yet its actions can be seen as an effort to safeguard religious freedom from instrumentalization as a tool of war. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anatoly. If I may briefly summarize, you talked about the explosion of religious diversity after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the rich religious diversity prior to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the liberal legislation in post-Soviet Ukraine, the consequences in the regions occupied by Russians after 2014, the role of the Moscow Patriarchate in the ideological justification of the full-scale invasion, in the delicate situation of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and then about the practicalities that the law does not restrict the right to pray in what is strictly truly a religious matter. Thank you so much, Anatoly. And now I may please hand over to Regina for her input. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you also for having me, and thank you, Anatoly, for the good introduction and preparing the ground for the discussion. So as the topic is really broad, I had to choose some few aspects to talk about, of course. So there are three aspects which, from my specific point of view, based on my work with Ukrainian colleagues, seem to me important to keep in mind and to discuss. The first point is that Ukraine has, as Anatoly now also very goodly showed us, Ukraine has a unique history and so far also a present of religious and confessional diversity. From the point of view of Eastern churches, 2019 and the establishment of a second canonical Orthodox Church within Ukraine presented an extraordinary situation, an opportunity to develop a new way of peaceful Orthodox coexistence in a modern civil society. This establishment of a second canonical church, Orthodox Church, was also a chance in the direction of detachment from state interference. It was a new and unusual for Orthodoxy, a new situation, especially in countries with an Orthodox majority, and it came, of course, therefore, with a lot of challenges and problems, but nevertheless, the opportunity was there. It is without doubt Russia's war and its instrumentalization of the religious question in Ukraine that destroyed this opportunity for a new Orthodox paradigm. The law from summer 2024 reacts to that threat by Russia, of course. However, from my point of view, it brings also the old way and the rather Soviet way of state interference back into religious affairs. The law operates with theological concepts of the canonical order of affiliation, which should not be part of legal judgments in a secular and in a democratic state. Theological ideas, so like ecclesial communion, must not be equalized to political frames of dependence or independence. I think that it's not possible to put these understandings, these political frames, on the church understandings of affiliation, of communion, and so on. So it is this interference, and for me, even more, I guess, the mindset behind the law, even not the law itself, but the mindset behind the law, that the state might regulate interchurch relations by law. And it is this interference, in fact, also bad news for all religious communities in Ukraine, not only for one particular church. It poses a threat for religious freedom and for the communion of religious organizations in Ukraine in general, not only for the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. My second point is more focused on in terms of orthodoxy and ecumenical relations. So the law, and especially the according public and media coverage, which accompanied this law and the process of getting to this law, this process bears the risk of preventing a harmonious development of inter-Orthodox relations for a very long time ahead. Instead of a consolidation of Ukrainian Christianity in its traditional diversity, which Anatoly also underlined, this law, as a reaction to Russia's war, caused new splits, polarizations, a forced homogenization, and most importantly, I guess, mistrust between the churches. What I know from my colleagues in Ukraine, from the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, it gets increasingly difficult to advocate for religious freedom within Ukraine without being accused of supporting Russian narratives. It became almost impossible to speak about religious freedom challenges in Ukraine without being accused to be an instrument of Russia and to be used by Russia at the same time. Lawyers don't agree to represent the interests of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church's parishes. Representatives in court, journalists refuse to cover violations of religious freedom in cases of the UOC. Web pages like Dialog Tut, which is a very important site web page, a platform which provided the opportunity for a critical discourse within the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, these web pages are blocked. And this is not only problematic from the legal point of view, but it is also significantly undermination of trust in the rule of law, mutual solidarity within the Christian community, and we see a huge lack or breakdown of trust, of social trust in the realm of this church, in their own state, in the Ukrainian state, which they are also trying to defend in the situation of war. My third point finally looks at the situation within the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. I am very far from idealizing this church, or any particular church, in fact. The war and the current law also reveal huge problems within the churches in terms of synodality. Synodality is a key term for Orthodox self-understanding, the claim of communal decision-making, of bottom-up communication on all levels. It reveals how fragmented the churches are on all levels. The leadership of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church fails completely for 2.5 years now to protect and support its own believers, which are loyal to Ukraine. It fails to find an unambiguous language in relation to the Russian Orthodox Church. It fails to find a position in relation to the collaborators in its own ranks, and so on. Instead, the leadership of the church sticks to power and nurtures a sectarian consciousness of the persecuted martyrs. Although far from the moral disaster which we see on the side of the Russian Orthodox Church, I perceive this situation within the leadership of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church nevertheless an ethical and pastoral failure. Without doubt, this counts also, on the other side, for the hierarchy of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, so the second canonical and more national church within Ukraine. This church also failed to build a culture of hospitality, a culture of mercy in relation to the faithful on the ground, which are fighting a very hard fight every single day in this war. So instead of strengthening and instead of empowering these faithful, the church leaderships strengthen an exclusivist identity and enmity between the faithful and the people within Ukraine. So in conclusion, I would like to say all of this underlines from my point of view that international human rights advocates have to focus on the rights of the believers on the ground in Ukraine and equally in Russia. And it's very important to keep the balance here between criticizing Ukraine and criticizing Russia at the same time. Also, international actors who look for the religious dimension of peace building in Ukraine will have to empower grassroots initiatives and focus on resilience building from below rather than sticking with the leadership of the churches. So thank you at this point, and I'm looking forward to your questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Regina. If I may summarize what I took away, Ukraine has a unique history of religious diversity. There was an opportunity for peaceful Orthodox coexistence, which was destroyed by the Russia's instrumentalization of religion in the war. You're worried about the way that the Ukrainian move could bring back, as you said, old Soviet ways of doing things and of state interfering with religious matters. You're worried, secondly, about the quality of the ecumenical relations that are at risk of being damaged long-term through the loss of trust. And you expressed some concerns with the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and its fragmented nature, its struggles with synodality, and the leadership structure that does not, as you put it, empower its faithful from the bottom up. Thank you, Regina. And if I may please now give the word to Jose. Thank you, Jose.
Thank you, Clemens. And it's a great pleasure to be here, being part of this conversation. We already have two very, very seriously posed positions. Let me add a third one. Let me call it the post-imperial, post-colonial context of the Ukrainian legislation banning the Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine. I'm a comparative historical sociologist that looks at religion and politics across history, especially the relation between religious and political regimes. So what I want to do is to put in context two other post-colonial contexts where we see the problem of how colonial churches can be disestablished under those conditions. Pope Francis poignantly said, do not touch the churches. But the churches sometimes need to be touched. They need to be touched when they are a threat to society. For instance, when the Catholic Church, its priests, its members, commit sexual abuse, abusing their spiritual authority against minors and women, and the church covers up those practices. And it needs to be touched when the church basically is an established church that has had hegemony and refuses to abandon this hegemony. So let me, as a comparative context, let me bring what happened to the Church of England after independence in Virginia, and what happened to the Catholic Church after independence in Latin America. In Virginia first, in 1777, in the midst of the Revolutionary War, Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence of 1776, drafted what is known as the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, aiming to disestablish the Church of England and guarantee freedom for all Christian denominations and non-Christian faiths. The statute was introduced into the Virginia General Assembly only in 1779, but language there and only was enacted into law in 1786, namely 10 years later. After independence, the Church of England changed its name to the Episcopal Church of America and cut all its ties with the Church of England. American loyalists that remained loyal to King George and the ruler of the Church of England had to emigrate with the defeated British army to Canada. In 1784, 1 year after the end of the Revolutionary War, Patrick Henry introduced the bill establishing a provision for teachers of Christian religion, which was going to raise taxes to pay the teachers of a new non-denominational Christian schooling in Sunday schools. James Madison and Thomas Jefferson fiercely opposed the bill, and with the help of the Baptists, the minority Baptists in Virginia, helped to pass the old revised Jefferson Statute. 1 year later, after 1784, Patrick Henry in 1785, James Madison wrote what perhaps is the best ever theological defense of religious freedom, namely, let me look for the title, Memory and, I don't have now the title with me, Memory and Remonstrance about the assessment. It was simply a critique of raising taxes for a Sunday school because they view it as a way of re-establishing the hegemony of the new Episcopal Church in Virginia. It's interesting that precisely the minorities in Ukraine, Baptists, Jews, Muslims, Greek Catholics, respond to this legislation the way they responded to the legislation of in Virginia, namely not as a threat to religious freedom, this establishment, but rather as the condition for the religious freedom of all, because only if the Orthodox Church abandoned its hegemonic position, which is still maintained until very recently, can there be religious freedom in Ukraine. Let me briefly present the story of Spanish colonial America. In the colonies in Spanish America, basically the Catholic Church was under the control of the kings of Spain under the royal patronage. After independence, the new government asked the Vatican to cede to them the privileges which the kings had to nominate the bishops. The Vatican refused and rather preferred to have all the dioceses empty, vacant of bishops for several decades. So the Latin American Church for several decades was without bishops because the Catholic Church did not want to give to the new regimes the privileges which they continue to concede to Catholic monarchs in Europe and that gave to the dictator, Spanish Catholic dictator Francisco Franco in Spain. Only after the adjournamento, once the Catholic Church accepted the principle of religious freedom in Dignitatis Humanae, based on the sacred dignity of the human person, and also the principle of religious pluralism in Nostra Aetate, the Catholic Church basically introduced voluntary disestablishment and has contributed to democratization in many, many Catholic societies. This is not the case of the Russian Orthodox Church, nor of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. They have never accepted those principles. The Orthodox Church of Ukraine, until today, I would say, claims to be the only canonical church in Ukraine and doesn't accept the rights of other Christian communities to be there legally. Of course, has no option because it has not the power of the state. But if the power of the Russian state will be reestablished in Ukraine, it will happen what is happening in the occupied territories in Crimea and in Donetsk and Luhansk. So ultimately, the argument I want to make is that in the same way that it was necessary to abandon or to limit the hegemony of the old Church of England for religious freedom, not only this establishment, but truly the end of the hegemonic position for religious freedom to be a reality. Without it, you cannot have religious freedom. People, of course, James Madison was also the author of the First Amendment to the Constitution that guarantees through the dual clause precisely that Congress shall make no laws restricting religious freedom, restricting establishment, actually preserving establishment, or restricting the free exercise thereof. And critics in the US have seen the banishment, the legislation in Ukraine, as precisely a restriction of freedom according to the First Amendment. But we must recognize that Madison first fought very hard to disestablish the church, not only the Church of England, but the Episcopal Church. The fact is that, as Professor Babensky has pointed out, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church inherited all the privileges of the Russian Orthodox Church, which it took once it, together with the Russian Empire, colonized or took over what had been an independent Ukrainian church from the 18th century to the 20th century. Throughout the 20th century, the Russian Orthodox Church refused to give in any occasion when the Ukrainians asked for it, any kind of autonomy, any kind of Ukrainization of the liturgy or of the governance of the church. It's true that eventually changed its name from the Russian Orthodox Church to the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, but not even once accepted the responsibility or expressed any remorse for having collaborated with the Soviet authorities in the bloody liquidation of the other religious communities. It has not shown in any way any remorse that this was something that should not have been done and that they are not going to do again. I'm not sure because they still call the others, they call Protestants heretics, they call Ukrainian Orthodox schismatics, and they call Greek Catholics still uniatists. And they do not express in any way that they have the chance to have against a symphonic relation with the Russian state, that they are going to allow religious freedom for other communities. So in this respect, I agree with all the religious minorities in Ukraine that the banishment of the Russian Orthodox Church is not a curtailment of religious freedom, but the very condition of possibility for the religious freedom of all in Ukraine. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jose. So you used the Kantian argument, the condition of possibility, and banning the Russian Orthodox Church not as a curtailing of religious freedom, but really as an expression of making it possible in the first place. You provided us with a post-colonial, post-imperial, contextual, comparative perspective. Thank you so much for the two comparisons you gave us from Virginia from the 18th century and Catholic Church after the independence of Latin America. You reminded us that the Roman Catholic Church arrived at the idea of religious freedom and religious pluralism all in the mid-1960s with the Second Vatican Council, and Dignitatis Humanae was a breakthrough that was not to be expected in the 40s and early 1950s. So thank you for that. I'm looking a little bit at the clock. It's 1:05. I just bring to your attention very briefly and in a layperson manner Professor Diane Desierto's thoughts. So she sent me, as I said, 10 pages. So I hope that Diane is watching because it shows her interest. On the other hand, I hope that she's not watching because I'm mutilating her very precise analysis. So Professor Desierto sent me a summary of her points. The summary of her legal analysis is as follows. the August 20th Ukraine ban on the Russian Orthodox Church and its affiliates in Ukraine violates Ukraine's treaty obligations under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the International Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, as well as various provisions of international humanitarian law. For example, the 1949 Geneva Convention on the treatment of prisoners of war, or the 1949 Geneva Convention on the treatment of detained persons during occupation. So the above violations can and will give rise to Ukraine's own international legal responsibility to other state parties of these treaties. The ban may have color of legality as a limitation of the right to freedom of conscience, thought, and religion under Article 35 of Ukraine's constitution or under Article 9 of the European Convention on Human Rights. And then we'll quote these documents in a second. But it remains Ukraine's burden to prove that the ban aligns with each of the required legal elements to justify this limitation. Professor Desiato also said that it's even more problematic that Ukraine is emulating the Russian Federation's own reported practices to suppress freedom of religion for over 10 years. So she quotes Article 35 of the Constitution of Ukraine. That's the article on religious freedom, where it says everyone shall have the right to freedom of personal philosophy or religion. This right includes the freedom to profess or not to profess any religion, to perform alone or collectively and without constraint religious rites and ceremonial rituals, and to conduct religious activity. And then in italics from Professor Desiato, the exercise of this right may be restricted by law only in the interests of protecting public order, the health and morality of the population, or protecting the rights and freedoms of other persons. And so she notes that the constitutional provision contains a general limitation clause. However, it is Ukraine's burden of proof to show that this is applicable here. Similarly, in Article 9 of the European Convention on Human Rights, where we read, I quote, everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief in freedom, either alone or in community with others in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in worship, teaching, practice, and observance. And then Article 9, Section 2 says, freedom to manifest one's religion or beliefs shall be subject only to such limitations as are prescribed by law and are necessary in a democratic society in the interests of public safety, for the protection of public order, health, or morals, or for the protection of the rights and freedoms of others. So here again, the burden of proof, as Professor Desiato says, lies with Ukraine. She did say, however, that it's quite difficult for Ukraine to justify that. The Hague Regulations from 1899 and 1907, the 1949 Geneva Convention, the additional protocols, treaties to which Ukraine is a party, all contain provisions obligating parties to armed conflicts to respect the religious convictions and religious practices of persons deprived of their liberty. So in my lay person's perspective, Professor Desiato would say, from a legal perspective, this is problematic. Ukraine takes a high risk in adopting this law because the burden of proof has to be shouldered accordingly. So, dear panelists, thank you so much for our original initial input. Can I just say I would give 1 minute to Anatoly, 1 minute to Regina, and 1 minute to Jose to respond to what you have heard so far, starting with Anatoly, if I may. You are muted, Anatoly.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Yes. So yeah, my reaction, I would like to react on some thoughts of Professor Regina, because she said that the actions of the Ukrainian government is similar to the communist regime. I can't agree with this because, as you remember, this government, how they started, they were very reluctant to interfere into religious matters. They distanced themselves from the religious sphere, and they criticized their predecessors who were very involved in the processes concerning the autonomous autocephaly for the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. So this government was very, very reluctant, and I think it showed at the beginning that it wanted to protect religious freedom and not to interfere into religious matters. What happened after the invasion? They reacted to different excesses and to different examples of collaboration between some priests and the believers of the Orthodox Church, Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and to the mood within the Ukrainian society. So I can agree that this government acts like a communist regime. So I think it's very strong words.
Thank you, Anatoly. Thank you. Regina, a minute for you.
Yes, then it's hard to have a minute. Very shortly to this, I didn't say that they acting already like the communist rules, but I see that as they react to the society's demand with this law. I think they more reacted with this law and with the whole process to what the society wants. So there were the surveys which demanded to ban this church completely and so on, and the state was under pressure to react. But exactly in this idea to react to the society's demand to ban something, this goes in the direction. So they bring the mood, the mindset back. It's not like acting as there are, of course, huge differences. A second thought I wanted to say to Jose's input. I think we really have to be crystal clear about distinguishing the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and the Russian Orthodox Church. We are really running danger to mix them up and then to don't do justice to this Ukrainian church, because it's not equal with the Russian Orthodox Church. And I have one very important point, because you said that they have to abandon the hegemonical claim, and they are still claiming to be the only canonical church in the country. All Orthodox churches in the world claim to be the only canonical church in the country. And it is a claim of truth, of religious truth, which you cannot regulate by law. And this is really important to keep in mind here. You will not break this claim to be the only canonical church. This is religious matters. This is matter of canonical law, not of state law.
Thank you, Regina. Jose, you have a minute.
Well, first of all, I am also concerned about the dangers of the law. I don't like the law. But on the other hand, I am against the people that never protest about any kind of religious freedom curtailment by the Russian Orthodox Church, and suddenly they're completely all over about this legislation without knowing the context. So I just wanted to bring for the American critics the context of what happens in post-colonial independence movements. It's true that the Ukrainian Orthodox Church after independence became different from the Russian Orthodox Church. But even there are two very different Orthodox churches. The one that remained part of the Moscow Patriarchate really did not break with the doctrines, with the principles of the Russian Orthodox Church. And never, it's very easy to say, oh, we are not a Russian, we were not part. Of course we were part. You were part of the liquidation of the other churches because you were the same. There was no difference between the Russian Orthodox Church and the Orthodox Church at the time. I'm sorry, this is the case. It's true that under Metropolitan previous to Onufriu, there is an attempt at Ukrainization, and there were chances for a real ecumenical dialogue. With Onufriu, this came to a stop, as far as I'm concerned. And now, and as a point about the mistrust, well, let's put it this way: none of the churches, Orthodox churches, recognize the right of a church that was recognized by the majority of Orthodox faithful as their church. And the Catholic Church did not recognize this church, even after, we didn't even talk to anybody in this church 2 years after the autocephalus. In terms of the problem for ecumenical dialogue, it was all the World Council of Churches and all the Orthodox churches and the Catholic Church itself, my own Catholic Church, that created the impossible conditions for ecumenical trust and dialogue in Ukraine.
Thank you, Jose. I know, Regina, you would like to respond, but is it okay? You will have your chance to just move on to a question that came in and the second one, and you will have your chance, Regina, so I promise that. And I think the question is both for, I guess Anatoly and Regina are both in a good place to answer, probably Jose as well. The question is this: The Ukrainian Orthodox Church claims to be independent from the Russian Orthodox Church. What are the criteria to judge the Ukrainian Orthodox Church to be independent from the Russian Orthodox Church? What arguments can the Ukrainian Catholic Church, Orthodox Church use for this claim? For example, can the Ukrainian Orthodox Church participate in the Orthodox councils without the Russian Orthodox Church's approval? Is Metropolitan Onufry, head of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, mentioned in the official lists of Orthodox hierarchs? So that's the question of what does it mean to be independent? Maybe Anatoly, you want to start, and then we ask Regina for her comment as well.
Yeah, it's a very hard question. I think that Metropolitan Onufry is thinking about this now, but there are two different diptychs now in the Orthodox world. In some of them, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine is present in the Greek diptychs of Greek churches. So another diptych without Orthodox Church of Ukraine, but the Ukrainian Orthodox Church isn't present in any of this. So it is recognized now by the world Orthodoxy as a part of the Russian Orthodox Church. And this is the main ground for the canonicity of this church. So how can it be independent? I don't know. They can send a letter to all primates of Orthodox Church, informing them that they can be in a communion, or not maybe in communion, but in a under the jurisdiction of Moscow Patriarchate under such circumstances when Russia is attacking Ukraine, and maybe to postpone the final decision on their status to the Pan-Orthodox Council, maybe appropriate step on their behalf.
Thank you, Anatoly. Regina, anything to add?
Yes, I just would I add that it is definitely a gray zone, which the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is in, canonically speaking. There is the point, for example, for establishing own structures outside of Ukraine, which the Ukrainian Orthodox Church does actively and therefore tries to show that they are independent. But they are not recognized by anyone. But the Orthodox Church of Ukraine is also not by all Orthodox churches acknowledged, and so on. So there are different levels of debating this, depending on from which position you look at. Yeah.
Thank you. Jose, may I direct the question to you? And of course, you're free to comment, you other panelists. The question is, how can Ukraine ensure that its approach to religious freedom evolves in a way that accommodates both national security concerns and the rights of diverse religious groups?
Well, as I said here, for me, the best judges are always the religious minorities themselves. The real problem are the two Orthodox churches. Both of them had claims to basically monopoly and canonical territoriality. And this is the problem. Regina said this is a doctrinal issue that cannot be changed. Well, I'm sorry, the Catholic Church changed its doctrine. It also claimed that the church has to be a state church. And as long as it is so, then there can be no democracy in a Catholic country. Of course, if there's a democracy, only if the state doesn't listen to the church. But the moment the state and the church are allied, which happens in the Orthodox countries, so it's not a threat to claim canonical territoriality if you don't try the state to impose it. But if you try the state to impose it, of course, it's a problem. So it has to do with the state-church relations, and as long as they don't change their theology of the state, and as long as they change their theology of the monopoly of territory, individuals may be canonical, or religious communities, but not territory cannot be canonical. If you make a territory canonical, by definition, you simply curtail the rights of everybody who doesn't belong to a religious community, and this cannot be in a democracy.
Thank you, Jose. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
I think that I hope that when peace emerges, that AUCRO can continue working as it has worked until now to represent the interests of all religious communities in Ukraine, and that whatever remains of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine can remain a member of AUCRO. Unfortunately, it was themselves that have separated from the group that belongs all the religious communities. I think that it's a limbo. It's a limbo, the situation of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, because before they were very happy with claiming we are the canonical church, the others are not. Now they find themselves in the same position. They have not broken with Moscow, because to break with Moscow will mean to be uncanonical. So they cannot break with Moscow without themselves claiming to be uncanonical.
Thank you, Jose. We heard limbo, we had gray zone. I have two questions, one for Anatoly and one for Regina. The question for Anatoly is about the everyday life consequences. How do you foresee the new law play out in the everyday lives of believers, the relationships between different religious communities, particularly among Orthodox believers? What's the cash value, so to speak, of the law as you see it unfold, Anatoly?
There is also a gray zone with this law, not only with the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, because nobody understands how the situation will unfold in the future, how far the government in implementing of this law, and what will be consequences of it. As far as I know, people are a little bit scared on the parishes because they were under influence of media, and media always repeated that the church will be banned, and the Russian Orthodox Church was banned by the law, not Ukrainian Orthodox Church. But we'll see. It's hard to predict how the situation will unfold. I think that we won't see banned parishes and banned dioceses. I think that it will be. Yes, the other thing I think that people will try to push also their priests and bishops to be more active concerning this law, and we see that there were some signatures gathering on parishes and between priests and different initiatives, because within this church, as Professor Regina Elfner said, this church is not homogeneous. So there are a lot of people, a lot of priests, a lot of believers that support, not maybe support this law, but they support the separation from Moscow Patriarchate.
Thank you. Thank you, Anatoly. So some people are scared, some people are confused, some people are pushing their priests and bishops to action. One question for Regina and one question for Jose, and then we're already wrapping up a little bit. The question for Regina is, can we apply the standards of countries in a peaceful situation to the situation in Ukraine, which is in this exceptional, unprovoked war situation? How does it look like from the standards you would like to see in a, let's say, Western peaceful country, and what's happening on the ground?
Now, of course, you cannot compare this. And I think it's very important to keep this in mind, that this country is struggling against a war of annihilation, and they have to take extraordinary measures also in the field of religious politics and in legal matters at all to safeguard their security. Nevertheless, the question is here, the Ukraine has a lot of laws which give them the opportunity to prevent collaborators, propaganda, traitorship, and so on. So they have all these laws. And the question would be, why would you need a separate law on religious communities and treat them in other directions, on other levels with other measures than everybody else in this country? And we see that these laws work. So we have the court cases of bishops, of priests, and so on. So it works.
Thank you.
And for me, the big question is why to put it in a separate section.
Separate law. Thank you, Regina. Maybe a last question from the question we received to Jose. What do you expect to be the diplomatic consequences of this law? The relationship of Ukraine in the international community, including European Union. Do you see any implications?
Well, there are implications if the people are moved by formal principles without putting things in context. I try to bring this context of post-colonial to understand what are the conditions of possibility for precisely creating an even field. And when I said the hegemony of this church still has the privilege of having all the religious buildings and has more dioceses than anybody, more bishops, more priests. but not because it is more faithful, but only because it inherited the power of the Russian Orthodox Church, the hegemony, and then every church they lost, they immediately replaced it at least with ones. So every community they lost because the people wanted to get out of the church, to go back to the church of their ancestors, they simply replicated. So that yes, the other communities grew, but the Russian Orthodox Church, or let's say the Orthodox Church in Ukraine, with the financial help of the Russian Orthodox Church and the Russian regime and oligarchs, continued building the kind of resources that no other church in Ukraine could. Look what happened to Laura. They still claim this is ours and we want to keep it and we don't want to share with the other Orthodox churches. This was their attitude. Look what happened with Potsayev. This was a Greek Catholic monastery. They still claim this is our monastery, and so on. We could go on.
Thank you.
So the question is, again, I think that internationally, there will be possibilities of precisely going against this type of legislation. I'm very skeptical of the concept of a spiritual national security as has been used by precisely the new Zelensky regime through the new director of religious affairs, who happens to be my fellow sociologist and friend, but I very much disagree with his.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you, Jose. Jose, if I could give you a final sentence, what would your final sentence be, Jose?
I am very hopeful. I've been hopeful against everybody since the 90s, talking about civil society in Ukraine and the democratic chance of Ukraine and religious pluralism. And I'm still very, very hopeful that Ukrainian society will be able to survive in spite of mistakes done by their states and their regimes.
Thank you, Jose. Hopefulness with the civil society. Regina, I can give you a minute, then you can respond to Jose before and make your final sentence.
I just wanted to add one important point, because Jose always pointed at the lack of awareness of what happened in the Soviet Union and the lack of repentance for all what happened. It was Filaret, Metropolitan Filaret, who was then part of the new independent church, who was mostly connected to the KGB and to all the things. And you have to then ask him for repentance and for getting along with the past too, and not only the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. So this was an important point for me. There would be a lot of, but yes.
Friends, thank you.
Regina. We cannot attack Filaret, and this we all agree.
Okay, good. Agreement here. Regina, your last sentence. I give you one last sentence.
I would like us to keep attendance and awareness on Ukraine, on the religious issue, not to lose this out of sight. And I would like to remind us that it is part of a bigger picture of Orthodox churches being in a huge crisis. It's not only about Ukraine, and we have to really keep an eye on what is happening in the Orthodox world in general, and maybe even to support their ways of coming to terms with their crisis.
Thank you, Regina. Thanks a lot. Of course, the last word goes to a Ukrainian friend. Anatoly, what would be your last sentence?
Yeah, I'm convinced that the religious freedom will be protected in Ukraine. And we won't see violence in the context of this law on behalf of the state. But what I would like to add also to our discussion is that on the ground, you also must understand that many Orthodox believers, they don't know really which church they attend. And when the previous government decided to push the Ukrainian Orthodox Church to make signs on their churches to identify their affiliation, their connection. So I'm convinced that state has no right to interfere into canonical matters, but churches are obliged to show to their parishioners their canonical connection, which part of which Orthodox Church they are part. So might help in the Ukrainian situation.
Thank you, Anatoly. I'm sorry, we are at time. I want to thank our panelists. Thank you, Anatoly. Thank you, Regina. Thank you, Jose. And thank you, Diane. All good wishes. I also want to thank the audience for your interest in your questions. I want to thank the colleagues who made this panel possible, Team Jackie, Grant Osborne, Keith Sayers, and Becca Prince. And I always end our panels with a quotation from our former university president, Brother John Jenkins on the day of the invasion, the full-scale invasion, when he said, "Our friends in Ukraine are in need of healing and hope. We at Notre Dame stand in solidarity with all peace-loving people worldwide in demanding an end to this invasion of a sovereign nation. This unprovoked war is an international abomination and must stop now. Until it does, may God keep safe all of the innocent men, women, and children who are currently in harm's way. The prayers of the Notre Dame family are with them." With these prayers for peace for Ukraine and for the world, we from the Nanovic Institute want to wish all of you a good and safe afternoon. Thank you so much. Goodbye now. Thank you.